So we'll go ahead and dive right in. I'll try to keep an eye on the chat, but just in case I don't see any notifications, would definitely love to take any questions, comments, ideas at the end as well. So Jacinda shared a really wonderful intro, but I always just like to share some photos when introducing myself. I think it just shows some really amazing joy. And also, I want to share some of the amazing people that have been a part of my journey and my life and supported me in this process. So, as mentioned, I went to college at Columbia where I studied medical humanities and then stayed at Columbia to get my master's of public health with a focus on epidemiology and specifically neuroepi. So I definitely spent a lot of time sort of crossing in between humanities and science world as I was a humanities major on paper and then was also very much still a neuroscience enthusiast. I love how the brain worked. This photo on the top left here is actually me when I was around 15 or 16 in my last year of high school. Can never say no to a chance to do a little photo op with brains and neurons. But really continue to love and explore neuroscience in college. And what really struck me about actually making the switch over from the neuroscience and behavior major to the medical humanities major was I really wanted the space to explore and learn a lot more about how neuroscience interfaced with our world beyond research and healthcare as well, and to see what those interactions looked like, whether that was in the neuroscience ethics space or in public health. Or when we think about more globally too, cultural interactions and what that means, thinking about topics such as dementia or brain death and what that means for different communities, and how that also influences our research initiatives and our plans in the research and healthcare world as well. So that's kind of a little bit of what led me to choose the MedHum major in college. And while I was there, I had the really amazing opportunities on campus to get more involved with brain injury advocacy, get more involved in clinical and public health research, and see what that world looked like. And also, I think just by virtue of being in New York City, was exposed to some really amazing opportunities to connect with a multitude of organizations around the area. So this photo here on the bottom left is actually from a Science City Hall session with March for Science. And this was actually the evening of graduation. So we hopped right over there with my little poster tube, got on the subway, and then went to have a really amazing time there. So I just share all of these to show that I think neuroscience outreach has been something that has, whether implicitly and perhaps more explicitly, just been a really large part of my journey since a college freshman to where I am now in grad school as well. And we'll be walking through also how Simply Neuroscience has influenced a lot of those different pathways along the journey as well. So, Simply Neuroscience is a trainee and a volunteer led organization. We are focused on early neuroscience and psychology education, outreach, and awareness initiatives. And our team currently stands at about 110, 112 team members, made up of the high school, undergrad, postbac, grad, and postdoc levels as well. So, our rough estimate is that most people on the team are maybe around the 13 to 30, 35 age mark. So, definitely early in their careers. And together we organize a variety of initiatives. There's a podcast called The Synapse. There's a Humans of Neuroscience interview series that, similar to the Humans of New York series, tries to showcase some of the individual stories beyond the CVs and resumes of really amazing folks in the neuroscience field. The Action Potential Advising Program is an online mentorship initiative that we started during the COVID pandemic, especially because so many folks were away from their home campuses and struggling to find community. And we wanted to find ways to take the perhaps silver lining of COVID and everyone being online and more digitally accessible to one another to try and form these connections and have some near peer avenues for mentorship. So that's a quick snapshot of some of the things that we've been up to, and we'll dive into those in a moment. And then what I really want to just mention here too is that our community, our team, our initiatives, all of those all that we do on a day-to-day basis, we try to approach through an interdisciplinary lens. That's something that is really meaningful to us and is at our core. And I think the reason for that is whether I come from, again, a medicine background, a lot of folks in our team are computational science, more biomedical sciences. Some are really interested in going the law route and to do more science communication. No matter where we may end up 10, 15, 20 something years down the line, our hope is that we can learn and see what neuroscience looks like again in society. So, some of my very early friends from, and I do call them friends, from the first couple of years of Simply Neuroscience, we met when we were in high school and our first couple of years of college, and I've now seen them graduate college. They're in grad school now. Some of them are working in disciplines such as aerospace engineering, which seems quite the furthest distance away from neuroscience. But just to highlight that once again, even though our day to day in many years down the line may not involve neuroscience, to keep in mind all of these principles of how the brain really ties to so many aspects of our life. And regardless of perhaps even if there's none of those field related collaborations in the future, to then at least take these experiences and skills with them along their way. And we'll chat about that too. Right. So, interdisciplinary approach, as mentioned, these are some of the disciplines that we are striving to introduce our students and community members to. This takes place through more of these neuro career spotlights on social media. And this is a really big shout out to our marketing team and our design team. May is actually here in the audience, so thank you, May. And this is one form through the Neuro Career series. We've also collaborated with other organizations such as the Dana Career Network to host virtual career fairs, trying to approach these exposure and learning opportunities from a variety of different modalities too. And a little snapshot of a few other members of our team. I didn't want to quite put them on the spot with their names, but I do want to tell you a little bit more about their backgrounds. And if you want to navigate over to our About Us section of the webpage and go find these people afterwards, please do. They're wonderful. But again, just the breadth of backgrounds that are represented in our team. These folks are specifically some of the senior leaders. One of them has moved on to be an alumna a couple of years prior. But we come from backgrounds spanning neuro, comparative literature, digital and computational studies, philosophy, psychology with a linguistics focus, and really just have a diverse breadth of interests too beyond studies as well. These are individuals who care about supporting community members and children with disabilities, one of whom is doing actually a fellowship in Europe right now, focused on bronze and clay sculpting, really harnessing a lot of her creative energy. And some things that I think are really cool, just from what I've heard in brief conversations with her, are that she sees such amazing interactions with anatomy and that process of creative sculpting as well, which I think is a just a beautiful crossover between the fields and one that I hope when she's back to the US in a few months again, we'll continue to hear more about and see more in action. Another team member here is involved with co-leading smart recovery groups that focus on supporting folks with addiction and substance abuse. Another team member is currently involved in researching more from the psychology lens, how academic misconduct investigations take place in higher ed, and how can we potentially revise and restructure those systems, especially now in this day and age of AI and a lot of evolving tech. So, how do we really facilitate that in a constructive manner for students and trainees? So, I think really just amazing to think about the number of ways that all of these individuals are approaching the neuroscience and psychology field. There really is no one straight line or straight door or straight entrance into how they got into learning about the brain and their passion. But altogether, trying to put together all of these interests and experiences that people come from to try and form cohesive initiatives that we really enjoy creating and learning from, and that we hope are helpful to others in the community as well. All right, so this is a little bit timeline showing some of the early initiatives from the first couple of years. So we started with Simply Neuroscience in May 2019. And something I always actually like to disclose is that we never actually ended or intended for this to become a fully fledged nonprofit organization. This was something that started out as a blog. And I was coming out of high school, heading into college. And when I graduated in 2019, that was still pre-COVID, and a lot of neuroscience programs were relatively still focused on in-person hubs. And being a high school student at that time, I didn't really find a whole lot of other folks at my school who had a similar interest. My teachers were amazing. I was a public school kid. They worked really hard and they tried to connect me out and to find opportunities that were relevant for me around the Sacramento area where I grew up. But I also found myself just doing a lot of sleuthing on the internet, trying to figure out what are some really interesting resources or programs that I could participate in. One of those really early things was Coursera courses online. And I love them, learned a little bit about neurobiology and learning how to learn with Barbara Oakley. It was amazing. Brainbee was also a really big part of my journey from ninth grade through the end of high school. And I was really, really kind for the Bay Area Brainbee chapter who was closest to me to allow me to come and participate with them. But that brings me to the point of we didn't quite know how to go about all of these things. And so I wanted to create a resource that I could share with peers that would follow me, my underclassmen at my school, to say, hey, these are some things I found that were really, really cool. And I hope you check these out too. And as the power of social media happens, I started posting some tidbits about this on socials, and other people started reaching out to say, I think we had a very similar experience, and I would love to join forces to do something that's because the power of many is greater than the power of one. So let's do something. And that's where we initially started with a couple of core initiatives, a writing blog, a team that was called Brain Resource Creation that was trying to collate or perhaps create some really student friendly learning materials. And then also awareness, the core of mental health awareness and advocating for folks who have neurological and psychiatric conditions has also been a part of the core since the start. A few months later, in December 2019, one of our wonderful peers who loved listening to podcasts reached out on Slack one day and said, Chinmayi, I love podcasts. I've realized, though, that understandably, most of the podcasts in this space are hosted by expert neuroscientists who are interviewing other expert neuroscientists. And you hear a little bit about what's going on in the field and their perspectives. But I am really curious, what if we were to start our own little student-led podcast where all of the interviewers and hosts were students, and we would reach out to professors, faculty members, experts, and hopefully they would respond to us. And then we could chat about things that we were really curious about, things that are on our mind, get their advice. And it's in a manner that's very lay friendly and it's easy to access for beginners. And we said, of course, why not? And then day one amazingly started building out an entire podcast series with 7 different mini series under it, ranging from one that focused on exploring what different undergraduate neuroscience programs looked at different universities, to one that was actually hosted in French, Narani Parle. I do not speak French, but I think it's absolutely amazing. Every kind of mind, all these series focused on mental health and how it looked like across different industries. For instance, one interview focused on looking at how architectural and interior design play such a role on impacting our well-being and what that meant and how could students get involved in that space and thinking about career development later down the line. So one example of a podcast that literally just sparked from an idea and a Slack message, and we started building up from there. And I think that we don't have time to dive into every single one of these different blurbs here, but I really just want to emphasize that as the core of pretty much all of these different initiatives is it started from someone who had an idea, they wanted to work on it, and they wanted to work on it together. So why not use this community that was building at the time as a framework to launch something and share with other students who would also hopefully find it meaningful. So the wellness, especially being at home during COVID and being isolated, where there was a series made by team members who wanted to focus on promoting mental health awareness and well-being activities among youth. There was an initiative launched to support translating of resources um, into a variety of languages described here. A lot of our community members who are based in the US are bilingual and multilingual, and also very much many team members who've joined from across the world. So that was definitely a source of pride and joy for many individuals to be able to share resources with their own community members as well. We had several members who've described how they've been chatting with their grandparents, for example, about neuroscience topics in their own native language. So towards 2020 is when we started hosting a lot more live events, trying to partner and collaborate with other organizations that were also led by trainees. Again, the power of many together is greater than one. We started the Action Potential Advising program that I mentioned earlier in the spring of 2021. Um, Other notable ones are a book club. We love reading. So we launched a book club. That was also an idea that was just a spark of there's so many amazing book clubs around. Why don't we do one that's neuroscience focused and we can chat about it? Some other examples, an open mic night. This was featuring a lot of pieces from students and youth who wanted to share a little bit about their interactions and intersections with neuroscience and more of the creative energy. We had a neuroethics debate competition, which was a wild experience to judge. Students are so talented. And then also just a more immersive experience to learn more about topics that students may not otherwise have exposure to until late in college and to grad school and beyond. I can say for sure that neuroethics was something that I had not heard until I was well into college. But we had some amazing superstar high school students who showed up and sweep the floor clean with their knowledge of these principles and just an open curiosity of coming in over the course of a weekend to learn more about these topics and then share their thoughts with others. And I also do wanna give a shout out. This is the case for many of these initiatives too, that it's led by a variety of volunteers on our team, but then also a variety of volunteers from the community beyond. Many faculty members and experienced professionals who have shared their time and insights and expertise to provide feedback to many of our participants across these events, and to mentor individuals in the long run as well. So we launched a mentor database. The 1,000 Opportunities database launch. This was 3 years ago, which is wild to say out loud. But we sat down and we were thinking, there's a lot of really cool things out there in neuroscience. I'm curious if we could get to 1,000 opportunities that we could share to students and say, there's a variety of options that you can explore out there. The answer was yes, there were 1,000 out there. We also very much did pull an all-nighter before we launched that the following morning, so it was also one of those experiences that I highlight as, a lot of the behind the scenes moments that I think there's just such joy and learning and persevering with your teammates behind the scenes. So, and these are some of our more recent, features. The social media aspect of our organization is a really big component of our outreach because again, a lot of the early career and next generation focused approach, many of these trainees are on social media. It's a way to find community and learn in bite-sized pieces on an everyday basis. So we really have tried to tap into these bite-sized forms of content and learning, and hopefully as forming a little bit of a spark for individuals who are curious about more the science communication lens, or even just catching up on new events and opportunities that they may have not otherwise heard about. So with that, I wanted to pivot a little bit to I've been talking at you about my experiences with seeing the team in action, but I also wanted to share some of the words from our volunteers directly and provide a little bit of context about what kind of their experience was like. So something that an initiative that has been development, I would say more so over the past year, a little bit more recent, has been a series of quote unquote synapse session journal clubs that are hosted by one of our awareness teams. Um, and the leads are two high school students, and they are absolutely incredible. And I love bragging about them whenever I can. Because one, I was definitely not doing that in high school. And two, I'm just so impressed. And everyone that we have worked with, collaborators externally too, are just so impressed by the level of time, attention to detail, and general dedication that they invest into making these initiatives happen. And so this was a reflection from one of the folks who was involved with hosting those events. And again, being a sophomore in high school, they were presenting and leading and introducing sessions that involved college students, grad students, many other members of the community. And in those initial stages, they were very uncertain and unsure. I think any one of us could imagine that it is a little bit nerve-wracking when you're doing something for the first time. Everyone else feels so much more experienced than you, but they managed to pull through and they gave it a shot and they found it very insightful. And this is also to say that behind the scenes, I think there's a lot of near peer mentorship that's built into that process of trying to build confidence amongst our team members. So, and that looks like even in it can look like even something that's very informal. It looks like a last minute Slack message 15 minutes before the event of, "Hey, yeah, this is what I was drafting to introduce the speaker. Do you have any advice?" Or when we are initially formulating our list of guest speakers to reach out to, taking suggestions from the team. Similar to how Jacinda mentioned earlier of knowing someone perhaps in your periphery who you think is really interesting and you want to reach out to them, really sourcing that kind of information and excitement from our team members. And then one of in the bottom right corner here, for example, was Dr. Peggy Mason was one example of a faculty member who a high school student was really interested in connecting with. Um, and many of y'all may know that Dr. Peggy Mason's really big in the introductory neuroscience and introductory neurobiology space, and a lot of the open coursework and courseware platforms like Coursera, for example, or EDX. So she is a one of the really big names in that space. And so for this student, again, maybe 15, 16-year-old, reaching out to them cold email wise, and then to have her write back to be able to speak with her and host a session with her firsthand was incredible. And it was just incredible to see them throughout that process. So a lot of the behind the scenes workflow, though, is something that is definitely we refine and learn and do over time. But it is a bit of leap of faith at the end of the day, is what I'm trying to share here. Is that yes, I think some of us, a little bit more older grad students, for example, a little bit more experienced, can provide our a little bit younger undergrad and high school colleagues with a template or a workflow of this is how we've organized some events in the past. But when it comes to actually doing them and putting that into action, that's where a lot of your own personal communication skills, your own organization skills, um, that really comes to shine. So, really, I think being able to see these folks take that on, and we've certainly learned from mistakes and failures, all of us over the years and over the course of these many initiatives, but to just simply have that opportunity to try something out independently with guidance as needed, right? We're not just throwing anyone out to sea by themselves. That would not be good. But to have the space to try and then to reflect on it afterwards and say, they found it really helpful. And I think to boost their self confidence to organize similar things later on is the most important. Other comments here are about how people had, for instance, a little bit related to science communication and writing, had never previously shared their work on a larger platform. And they also facilitated the sharing of resources that, again, not only they found helpful, but they also hope that others in the community beyond could find helpful. These resource features of, for instance, if you're interested in computational neuroscience, here are some opportunities that you should check out. Um, so all of those I think are also really valuable to hear and related to also on the top right here, the comment I mentioned briefly earlier about the translation initiative. We also had one student reflect on how it just meant a lot to her to be able to share some of her learning again with her community in her native language. So, a couple more thoughts here. The one on the left I found particularly really amazing because it highlights, I think, how every single person has something that's insightful to share as a near peer mentor, especially. This was a team member who one of the very first projects that they were volunteering at when they joined the organization was a graduate student panel. This was a number of master's, PhD, MD students who were sharing about their experiences of navigating applying to graduate school, how they knew they wanted to pursue grad school, what that meant, what it looks like now, and sharing about that. And I think that for you're a first year PhD student, for instance, it can be really intimidating to share about what that process has been like with a wide audience of 50, 60 students because you feel that you may not have all the right answers. And you feel like a little bit of an imposter at times, let's be honest, of I don't really feel that I know all the right answers. These are answers are maybe not perfect. But this student in particular heard back a lot of feedback from other students who were pursuing a similar path to her, who were first generation students, also trying to navigate the field, that it meant a lot to have that sense of a community and to hear from her directly. So this is something that I highlight not just as an aspect of Simply Neuroscience, but also I think one of the powers of a lot of these early career outreach spaces is that there is a lot of learning from each other. And that near peer mentorship is something that is inherent. And I think that though it is inherent, we oftentimes need to invest in spaces and community organizing to bring that out a little bit, to actually foster spaces for that. And that could look like something like a graduate student panel, or it could look like a very casual social on Zoom where we start out playing Pictionary and it ends in us chatting about life decisions and academia and advice and everything. So, whether it's formal or informal, I think just recognizing that within these spaces of student collaborations, there's a lot of that untapped potential and advice that is incredibly helpful to hear from people who are at similar or perhaps one career stage beyond where you are, in addition to perhaps mentorship that you might receive from individuals who are a lot further senior in their careers. So, both very equal and valuable forms of mentorship. And this other person here shared about how being able to explore a little bit more through this community has helped solidify their interest in neuroscience. They've been able to learn a little bit about the resources that are out there for them, and then hopefully find a little bit more support in the next steps of their journey. So, I want to take a few moments here to talk about a little case study of a mental health and substance use prevention course that was organized by the awareness team. The high schoolers that I mentioned earlier, they were a part of hosting this. And I thought it was a little bit biased here, but I will still say I thought it was a beautiful execution behind the scenes from start to finish of bringing this to life. So, this was not only a single day event, but this was over the course of 5 weeks where students felt really passionate about wanting to raise awareness about mental health and substance abuse in different communities and how we can mitigate that and how we can support and build resilience in our communities. So, this was a really beautiful intersection of seeing how neuroscience and public health and also community advocacy crossed paths and supported one another. And in doing so, they actually reached out to a wonderful organization called the SAFE Project, which works to stop and address unfortunate addictions and overdoses in various communities across the United States. They reached out, they set up a partnership meeting with them, built out a pretty much a scope of work of what they wanted to achieve and accomplish with this course, what kinds of personnel would be required from both organizations, who would be hosting these different sessions, who would be preparing materials for these sessions, who would be reviewing applications for other students who are interested in participating in this program, who's going to be emailing speakers, and the entire workflow. So they built out a curriculum over 5 weeks, which started off with an introduction to the space, and then ended with a capstone where participants actually shared reflections or ways that they were interested in taking action within their own communities. A number of these students, again, high school and college students, for instance, spoke about how they had noticed a lack of naloxone training on their college campus. And maybe that's something that they wanted to expand or build out more because they now had a little bit of knowledge about not only the neuroscience side and research and what that tells us, but then also they were able to understand more of the personal impact of what it meant to have these conditions in our communities. So I thought it was just a really beautiful example of being able to see kind of the evolution. Again, this is a very short duration of time, but to see that a little bit of an idea or change spark at the end of this initiative. So again, it was this was all student led and this was all volunteer led, which I emphasize to say that this is something that these folks were doing after classes on the evenings, on the weekends, and truly still built out an amazingly executed initiative. So kudos to all these folks who are volunteers and doing this. It's kind of like classes in the mornings, outreach in the evenings, but they brought it to life. And then some reflections. I think I what I hope has really come across in our short time today is that all of these individuals who are part of these initiatives are students first and foremost, and they're trainees first and foremost. They oftentimes, especially in the outreach space, start out as participants in an initiative in some way. Whether that was participating in science fairs as a high school student, perhaps the Brain Bee, they're in college and they're exposed to a neuroscience interest group on campus, and they want to expand more of the local outreach. Perhaps that looks like Brain Awareness Week, or that looks like a community seminar with local leaders. And I think there's that spark of realization that not only are they participants, but they can also be active designers and creators in that process. And that also comes with the requirement of having spaces for them to learn and to have a flexible opportunity to learn and to fail. Autonomy is really important in this process because I think at the very first stages of that process, it's important to have some sort of a structure, right? No one jumps in from you attend an outreach event. to the next day you're organizing a beautiful conference that's got 100 different speakers and everything. That doesn't happen in one day. But it happens from learning from others who definitely come before you in that space, right? But then also progressively, you move to that stage where you do have a little bit more autonomy to take something on. Again, give it your best shot based on everything you've learned, and then learn from your mistakes and failures. So I think that oftentimes the high school, college level, especially, and also the graduate student level, is that perfect training opportunity and that space for individuals who are curious about getting more involved in outreach and SciComm to initially be able to try out and see what this feels like. What does it feel like to go from perhaps you're not leading a weekend symposium, but you are supporting a weekend symposium? What does that look like behind the scenes? Because it's very different from when you're sitting in the audience to when you're running around and emceeing and everything and emailing at, again, 11:59 PM the night before to finalize logistics, right? But I think that having very friendly, dynamic spaces where you can have those experiences early on is super important because that forms the seed for whether it's into graduate school or post-bac careers or postdoc or level beyond to continue to build on those experiences because you now know a little bit of what to expect. It's really difficult to know if something interests you or how you can get involved if you don't have an early exposure to it. Now, obviously, this is not to say that mid-career transitions or late career transitions are not a thing at all, right? That's not that's not the point I'm trying to make at all today, but rather that when we do have opportunities to for in the early career space to not only introduce neuroscience as a scientific subject or psychology as an academic subject, but then to also weave in these opportunities for people to see what this looks like outside of research and healthcare spaces that are what they most traditionally have the most access or exposure to, I should say, then I think it just opens up the can of beautiful worms. I know we use the can of worms in a negative way a lot of times, but I think it's beautiful because it gets you to start thinking. It gets you to reframe your perspective a little bit and thinking about, can I also do this? And what does that look like for me to be able to do that in my own future? I think of, for instance, um, something I was told a lot when I was pre-health in college was that all of this neuroscience outreach things that you were doing are really cool, Chinmayi, but you're not going to be able to do that when you're in med school or residency or whatever. Like, you're going to have to put that on pause, come back to it in a couple of decades down the line. And it's sad to hear that. It's a little bit, it's a little bit disappointing to hear that. And I think that discovering how amazing this space was and that we're not only passive student participants, but we can be active and make a difference. And being able to realize that early on, um, I think has set the stage for a lot of what I still try to make space for. Even right now in the busy schedule of medical school, I find that being involved in these initiatives brings me a lot of joy and actually combats burnout. So, and I hope that that's the case for many other individuals too, is to not only discover this one day and regret, I wish I could have seen this or learned about this or heard about this 20 years ago, but to rather have this be something that grows alongside with you. I very lovingly call it kind of side quests in a way, but I think it's really beautiful to not only be a part of the more academic world, but then to also see what it's like outside of that. So, earlier, I mentioned a little bit of how students along this process also develop a lot of those soft skills that I think translate widely beyond even the outreach space, learning how to communicate, verbal, written, project management wise, being able to take something from A to Z is such a superpower. And these soft skills are ones that translate, I think, really beautifully into the job market as well. It's much more easy to advocate for yourself and your skills when you can demonstrate how you really thrive in those kinds of dynamic environments. You can make those decisions and to be able to showcase that. And I think that also ties into this point I have on the slide here a little bit later, which is about there's a lot of cultural change that's happening in academia right now. And I think that's both top down and bottom up. When it comes to when we're selecting trainees for PhD programs, when we are trying to select for our colleagues when we're hiring for researcher roles or postdoctoral roles, I think we are anecdotally hearing that there is a lot more space and interest in folks who have these more interdisciplinary kinds of skill sets and experiences. They've been involved in some sort of organizing initiatives outside of the classroom as well. Because not only is that important on a society level that they have that awareness, but it also shows that they're hopefully going to be the kind of person who really cares about catalyzing that amongst their cohort, and hopefully getting others also interested in that. And also that beautiful skill set, right? They know they know how to work a PowerPoint, an Excel sheet, Canva, Zoom, everything. They're probably involved in all sorts of little tidbits that they've picked up along the way. I did not know how to use Canva before all these Simply Neuro projects, I will say very honestly. Um, and my team members will laugh at me because I'm certainly no design pro by any means, but I know my way around Canva now a little bit. So just one little small thing that I picked up along the way. Um, the collaboration part I want to bring up here too, in terms of how beautiful outreach, especially in the kind of quote unquote post COVID landscape is that we're no longer restricted to those in person hubs that I was talking about and that I felt existed primarily when I was in high school pre COVID. We are now a lot more open to collaborating cross regionally and globally. And I think the beauty of that is that I know we have a very interesting climate right now in the United States, but then it's also neuroscience is not just in the United States, is it? It's global. So when we lose sight of that and we are so caught up in our local regional bubbles, I think we lose out on a lot of talent and collaboration opportunities. And what I have seen really wonderfully at the trainee level is that some of the peers that I mentioned earlier are not based in the United States, and they don't live near me, and we didn't go to school together. And so that meant that I was meeting these really amazing peers and friends, and I hope we continue to be collaborators. And we've all met, and perhaps we would have not met if we didn't have opportunities like these. And I think about, for instance, the Society for Neuroscience conferences, and I've mentioned this to my peers before, of in 20, 30 years, we're going to be the people up there on the podiums who are giving presentations and who are leading these symposia and who are giving these keynotes. That's going to be us one day. And to think that all of these, we may not view them as networks that we're building as peers right now, but these are the folks that we will continue to work with 20, 30 years down the line. You're going to be perhaps applying to funding with, which is crazy to think about, but it's really cool. Um, and fostering just amazing, whether it's not only in research, but also more broadly beyond there. The collaboration networks of tomorrow, those seeds are happening today at the trainee level in ways that feel very fluid and are easy to foster. So I just mentioned that as a point too of I think that the early career outreach space especially seems very open to that. And I say that as not just related to Simply Neuro, but anecdotally beyond as well. And I think that's something that I really hope we can tap into more is how do we engage with a lot more peers and colleagues from the global south, bring them into conversations utilizing Zoom and a lot of other digital avenues, because it's incredibly valuable. I've excuse me. I've spoken a lot about near peer mentorship, so I will not speak about that once more. But I do want to point out a really interesting statement that actually one of my mentors, Dr. Miyamoto from med school, shared is that today's trainees are also our colleagues tomorrow. And so even though it may seem like when you're working with a first year college freshman, for instance, if you don't have much experience, they may seem naive. They're still figuring their way out about the field, about all these different initiatives, but they bring passion with them. And I think that when we tap into that, um, you are channeling, I mean, such talent that's going to show up many years down the line as well. And they're going to be someone that you call up again for funding proposals or whatnot. They're going to be your co-PIs. And so I think that not just seeing the hierarchy of how it is in academia right now, where it's very much you may be very low in the totem pole as a student, but to rather maybe adopt a more decentralized approach. And again, this is very difficult to foster, right, beyond our own individual teams because that's a system level change. But I think that's part of this cultural change that hopefully we can start to drive and foster and continue is that approach of everyone has everyone has something that they bring to the table, whether it's their lived experience, it can be concrete skills, it can be soft skills, it can be their ideas, but to view it really as very multi-directional in that sense and not just what you're learning from the senior to the junior, and it doesn't go the other way around. So I just bring that up too as a really, I think, powerful point that mentor has brought up. We've spoken a little bit about the value of interdisciplinarity. It's really amazing when you have folks who, even at an early stage in their career, are excited and are able to foster and lead and participate in conversations that extend beyond their own area of expertise. Um, I think that requires a lot of humility and curiosity, and oftentimes that's one of those things that's stomped out of us in schooling, right? By the time we get to college, I think there's the age old question of how do we bring back kids' curiosity? And so I think that the neuro outreach space is a perfect opportunity for us to bring back that sense of curiosity and promote a lot of this more interdisciplinary thinking. Some of my closest friends are in fields that are very unlike my own, even within neuroscience. I know nothing about computational neuroscience. I sit there and I listen and I walk out with like stars in my eyes because I'm so wow. Um, but it takes a little bit to go and sit in those kinds of rooms because you feel so lost and unsure. So how can we promote more of that sense of humility and interest in learning about one another's fields? I think that's also a really valuable part of these spaces. And the last thing I want to mention briefly here is, of course, we've spoken a lot about the amazing parts of being involved in early career outreach, but there's also some challenges that come with trainee-led initiatives. One of the biggest parts is time constraints. A lot of people are in schools in their first jobs. They're really busy and they're juggling a million different things. So doing this all on a volunteer basis when free time permits means that also ties into the next part. Sustainability can be really difficult. I think of, for instance, on campus initiatives are one of the biggest, I think, avenues for people to get involved with, right? And with those, you're on an annual cyclical basis. You want to have students and trainees after you who can then join the executive board and carry on your work. But what that means is that your plans, your initiatives, your existing versus new ideas, all of those can evolve and change over time. So something that perhaps, well, I can actually say when I was in freshman year working with this group called Synapse on campus, that was for brain injury advocacy, our ideas and thoughts were very different from where we are now in 2026 when I see the club posting about their projects on social media. There are some recurring themes, for instance, hosting a community summit related to brain injury or a research panel. There's also such wonderful new ideas and ones that have also been kind of scrapped and recycled too. And that's okay. But it's just about when we are building out the frameworks for these organizations or initiatives, how do we try to account for sustainability and a little bit of those jarring transitions in between that can happen naturally when everyone on your team is going to graduate someday and move on and go do amazing things in their careers. Last but not least, funding is difficult. I think it's a little bit more unfortunately difficult right now. But I kind of mentioned this as a call of action to say that a lot of these trainee led initiatives make things happen on a shoestring budget. They just get the bare minimum funds that they can to keep the lights on, and they go along with it. And it can also be really difficult to apply and seek a lot of the funding sources because, again, you're not quite the PIs where you can apply to larger scale funding. And oftentimes, this is where mentors come in, people who are more experienced. Um, they have an affiliation with a university or an institution, and they care about getting folks the support that they need to scale out their ideas. So I would say that this is just a wonderful call to action here of a number of funding opportunities that we have had as an organization with Simply Neuro have come from folks who have really been amazing support and have been willing to sign on as co-sponsors, for instance, through our own universities. But for folks who are a little bit more established in our institutions, to lend a helping hand and to provide their voice and their hand of support, I think that really goes a long way in these initiatives being able to scale and expand and take it on to the next steps. So I know it's a lot of information. I will pause there on that note. Would definitely love to keep in touch. This is my email address. And if there's any trainees on the call here today, I just wanted to spotlight a couple of opportunities. There's a panel happening tomorrow, and the virtual mentorship program is recruiting mentors and mentees. So please feel free to reach out if you would love to collaborate or get involved in any way.